Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'll be showing you how to draft the basic trouser pattern and how to alter it to get your palazzo pattern. If you are new here, I'm Fola and thank you for joining me. For those who are already subscribed to this channel, thank you so much for your support, and if you are yet to subscribe, please make sure you hit the subscribe button now. Thank you. So these are the measurements we are going to be needing for this. We'll need our waist circumference, the hip circumference, the hip depth, the crotch depth, the front crotch extension, back crotch extension, the knee circumference, trouser length. The first thing I did was to leave about 3 inches margin from the top of my paper. Then I connect that with a straight ruler. So I'll be starting my measurements from that point. So the first thing I did was to place my crotch depth, which is my hip circumference divided by 4. Mine is 12.5. Then I'll connect that to the straight ruler. Then from that point as well, I input my hip depth measurements. Mine is 9 inches. Then I'll draw a straight line there as well. So I'm going to label my lines now. So this is my waist, that's my waistline, this is my hip line, and that is my crotch depth. The next thing I did was to create another margin from the edge of my paper, which is 4 inches. Then I'm just going to connect that with a straight ruler down to the bottom of my paper. The next thing I did was to mark my hip circumference divided by 4 on the waistline, starting from that line. My hip circumference divided by 4, which is 12.5. I marked it on the waistline and on the crotch line as well. Then I'll connect that with my ruler. So that box right there is my crotch box. So that line right there is my center front. So all our measurements will be starting from that line. On the waistline, I placed my waist circumference divided by 4 plus 1 inch for that intake. My waist circumference is 37 divided by 4, that is 9.25, plus 1 inch, that is 10.25. So what I placed there is 10.25. Then I'm going to raise the side by ½ inch. I came up by ½ inch there. So for my dart intake now, I'll mark the midpoint of my waist measurements there. Then I placed ½ inch on both sides of that mark. Your dart length should be around 4 to 4.5 inch. Then I'm going to connect my darts, just like you see me doing. So that is my front dart. Then I blend my darts to the ½ inch mark there with a slight curve. Then the next thing I did was to connect my waistline to the hip line, like you see me doing. The next thing I'm going to do now is to mark my front crotch extension. To get your front crotch extension, all you have to do is to divide your hip circumference by 20. Mine is 2.5. All I did was to place 2.5 inch on the crotch line. That's the mark is starting after the center front line. Then I'm going to draw my crotch curve now. All I did was to place my curved ruler like that. Then I'll just draw a curve into the straight line. So the next thing I did was to measure from my crotch extension to the side of my pattern. Then I'll find the midpoint of that. Now I'll mark the midpoint. The next thing I did now was to mark my knee length, my waist to knee length. Then I placed my trouser length as well. Then I extended the lines. So this is my knee length and my trouser length. So the next thing I did was to measure what I have from my side line to the midpoint there, and I placed it on my knee line and on the hem of my trouser. Then I'm going to connect that with a straight ruler. So that line there is my crease line. The next thing I did was to place my knee circumference on my knee line. When you're taking your measurements, make sure you measure your knee circumference loosely. So my knee circumference is 24. So I'm going to place half of the knee circumference on the knee line. So that is 12 inches. Half of my knee circumference is 12 inches. So I'm going to share the 12 inches on both sides of the crease line. So I'll be placing 6 inches on this side and 6 inches on the other side of the line. I'm going to place the same measurements on the hem of my trouser too. That is 6 inches on one side and 6 inches on the other side. So I'm going to connect my crotch line to the knee line with a straight ruler. Then I'll connect the knee line to the hem of the trouser with a straight ruler. And at the center front, I'm going to connect my crotch line to the knee line with my hip curve. Then I'll connect my knee line to the hem of the trouser with a straight ruler. So we are done with the front pattern now. So I'll be drafting the back pattern now. I'll be making use of this red pen so you can easily differentiate between the front and the back pattern. So on the crotch line, I came in by 1 inch from the center front line there. I came in by 1 inch. You can use 0.75 inch for a smaller person. Then on the waistline, I came in by 2 inches from the center front line. Then I'm going to connect the line. I'm going to extend it above the waistline like that. So I extend the line by 2 inches. I marked 2 inches there. I extend the line by 2 inches. So I'll be placing the quarter of my waist measurement from that extension plus 1 inch for that intake. I'm going to mark that. Then on that point, I'll come up by ½ inch. I'm going to raise the waist by ½ inch, just like we did for the front pattern. Then I'm going to connect that with a straight ruler. Then the next thing I did was to mark my dart intake. I marked the midpoint of my waistline. Then I mark ½ inch on both sides. Then I'm going to draw my dart now. when you want to draw your back darts, make sure you place your ruler in a slanted form like this. Your dart leg should stop at the same point of the front. Then I'm going to connect the 1/2 inch on both sides to the dart leg. So that line right there is our center back line. On the crotch line, I will measure and mark 1/4 of my hip circumference plus 1 inch for ease. 1/4 of my hip circumference is 12.5 plus 1 inch, that is 13.5. I'll be placing 13.5 mark on there. Make sure you place the mark starting from the red line, that is our center back line. I'll measure whatever I have left from the edge of my paper to that point there. Then I'll place it on my hip line as well. Make sure that whatever you have there, I think I have about 2 inches left there. I'm going to place the 2-inch mark on the hip line as well. Then I'm going to connect my lines now. I'll connect my waistline to my hip line, just like you see me doing. Then I will link my hip line to the crotch line like that. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to add 1/2 inch to my knee line, and to the hem line I'll add 1/2 inch there. Then I'll connect with my straight ruler. So that means my back pattern is 1/2 inch bigger than the front pattern. So on the center back line, I'm going to mark my back crotch extension out now. My back crotch extension is my hip circumference divided by 10. Mine is 5 inches, so I'm going to place the 5-inch mark there. Then I'm going to connect my crotch curve now, my back crotch curve. All I'll do is to place my curved ruler there. Then I'll connect my curve just like that. So that is my back crotch curve. Then I'm going to add 1/2 inch also to the knee line and to the hem line. Then I'll connect the dots. I'll connect that with my hip curve. I'll connect it to my back extension, and I'll connect that with a straight ruler down to the hem line. So that is all for the drafting of my front and back pattern. So all I did now was to place another pattern paper under my pattern. So I'll be tracing out my front pattern. I'll be tracing out my front pattern to the new paper now. So the front pattern is the black one, so I'll be tracing out the black. I'll be tracing out the black pattern. The front, that's the front pattern. I'll be tracing it out on the new paper. So I'm done tracing out. So all I've done now is to highlight my lines with my marker. So this is my front pattern. So I will be tracing out my back pattern now. The back pattern is the red line, so I placed the new paper under the pattern, then I traced out my back pattern as well. So I'll be tracing that out as well. So this is my back pattern. So that is all for our basic trouser. So if you are going to be making just the basic trouser, this is practically all. This is where you are going to stop. But now to alter it into your palazzo pants, all I'm going to do is to mark 2.5 inches on the hem of my trouser. I'll mark 2.5 inches on both sides of the hem of my trouser. Then I'll connect it to the crotch line. The more you add, the wider your palazzo pants would be. You can add more. You can make it 3 inches wider or 4 inches wider, depending on your preference. So I'll just connect that to the crotch line, just like that. So that is it for my back pattern. And for the front pattern, I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'll place 2.5 inches mark on both sides of the hem. I'll place 2.5 inches there and 2.5 inches there. Whatever I do for the back, I'll do for the front as well. Then I'll connect it to the crotch line, just like that. So that is all for the palazzo pants. So I'll be cutting out now. I'll be cutting out my pattern now. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to create my band from the pattern. All I'm going to do is to close my darts, just like that. I want the length of my band to be 1.5 inches. That is my center back. So what I'll do is to place 1.5 inches there from my waistline. I'll mark 1.5 inches downward like that. Then I'm going to connect with my ruler, just like you see me doing. So I'm going to label that as my back band. So I'll be adding my allowance when I'm about to cut on fabric. I'll be adding 1 inch to the side of my pattern, and I'll be adding ½ inch to the inseam there. So I'm going to cut out my back band now. Then I'll remove my tape from my pattern. So that is all for the back pattern. So I'll be working on the front pattern now. So to cut my front band as well, all I'll do is to close my darts. Then I'll mark the same measurements, which is 1.5 inches for my back band. Then I'll connect with my ruler. So that is all for my front band as well. Then I'm going to cut that out as well. So to create my pockets now, I'll be closing my dart as well. I'll go back to close my darts. So to create my pocket entry, the first thing I'll do is to come in by 2 inches from the side seam. Then I'll come down by 6 inches. Then I'll connect that. You can connect it with a slight curve if you want, but I'll be making mine with a slanted line. I'll connect it like that. Then from the center front, I came in by 2 inches, depending on how wide you want your pocket to be. I want my pocket depth to be as low as the crotch line. So I'll just connect that. I'll just connect that with a straight ruler halfway like that. Then I'll connect with a curve into the line, into my crotch line like that. So that is all for the pockets. So all I'm going to do now is to place that on another paper, and I'm going to trace it out just like that, just like you see me doing. I'm going to trace out my pockets. So I'm going to highlight that with my marker. So I'll just trace that out with my marker. So this right here is my pocket bag. I'm going to label that as my pocket bag. Now I'll cut it out. So for my pocket facing now, all I'll do now is to cut out that slanted line, my pocket entry. I'll cut that out. Then I'll trace that on a fresh paper like you see me doing. I'll be tracing it out like that. Just follow the lines like that. So I'm going to highlight that with my marker. So I'm going to cut that out. So this is my pocket facing. So this is how it's going to look like. So that is all for the drafting of our basic trouser / palazzo trouser. Trust me, the pattern is really easy. If you can just follow the step-by-step process, you are going to get it at once. It's not hard at all. We'll be adding the necessary allowances when we're about to cut on fabric. In the next video, I'll be showing you how to cut out on fabric and how to sew. I'll be showing you the step-by-step process on how to sew. If you have watched till this point, thank you so much for sticking by. I hope this video has been helpful to you. Please do not forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Till I see you in the next video. Bye.